Welcome to Head On here on Shaw TV. I'm your host, Hilary Eastmure. On this show, we take a closer look at some of the issues making news on mid-Vancouver Island. On today's episode, derelict vessels. It's a problem plaguing many coastal communities, and despite years of work, it seems like a solution is still out of reach. I'm joined today by Jean Crowder. You're the MP for Nanaimo Cowichan. Thanks for being here. Not running for re-election in this upcoming election for the NDP. And Aaron Stone, you're the mayor of Ladysmith.
Yes.
Thanks for being here. So first off, let's define the issue of derelict vessels a little bit, because I think for some people they're not exactly clear on what that means. Jean, how would you define a derelict vessel?
Well, part of the problem with it is there is no precise definition, but generally speaking, when we talk about derelict vessels, we're talking about a vessel that's been abandoned, is in danger of sinking or polluting the environment. That's about as close as you can come to it.
Okay, and so this is an issue that you've been working on for years as an MP. And Aaron, you sort of inherited this problem when you became the mayor of Ladysmith.
Yeah, it's an issue that Ladysmith's been working on for nearly a decade, and progressively over the last several years becoming more and more involved as the problem gets worse in our harbors. It's a problem, as you say, for coastal communities all over British Columbia, but especially some of the smaller coastal communities that have limited resources available. It presents a unique set of challenges that we're just unable to face without assistance from other levels of government.
Right, and so it's a problem that ends up in your harbor, but you may not have the money to deal with it, and it should it be the municipality's problem? Exactly.
Jurisdictionally speaking, it is a federal responsibility. Derelict vessels are managed through Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard for different reasons. Transport Canada will take action if a derelict vessel poses a risk to navigation. And ironically, one of the biggest issues we have right now, the Vicky Lynn 2, was actually brought to our harbor by the Canadian Coast Guard and Transport Canada because it was in behind islands out in the Ladysmith Harbour. It was brought into a sheltered place and left there, and we've been left to deal with it since. So that was 2 years ago now.
Hilary, part of the problem with this is that it's a jurisdictional quagmire. So at the federal level, you'll have Transport Canada, as Aaron pointed out, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and you will also have Environment Canada if the Environmental Protection Act is invoked. And then you have all these complicated issues about foreshore and whether it's a provincial government responsibility. But by and large, it ends up being the municipalities who end up dealing with their local residents who are very concerned about it. And you'll find that at the federal level, you'll get the government departments pointing their fingers at each other saying, no, I can't deal with it because it's not X. It's a mess.
Yeah, so it's a hot potato issue.
Well, and we've experienced that directly with the issues we're dealing with right now, where we just get sent around a circle of finger pointing on whose responsibility it is, and nobody's willing to engage us to come up with a solution that'll actually solve the problem in the short term, as well as work towards longer term solutions, as Jean's been trying to do for the last several years.
And I mean, the issue with derelicts is not just that they're an eyesore in the harbor. There's a multitude of issues around them. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, to begin with, they can be a hazard to navigation. And so when a vessel is in a navigable waterway, they can actually interfere with shipping in the shipping lanes. The second problem is that they can have all kinds of contaminants on board, not just oil, but often there's many chemicals on board a vessel. And if it sinks or if it lifts and it starts leaking, then you've got pollution that affects the waterways, it affects the shellfish life, it certainly can wash up on beaches and create problems with tourism. And then you can also have, it gets into this gray area around environmental protection. So if it affects a potential species at risk, there's another matter. And I know Aaron can speak to the fact that about the costs that are involved with trying to clean this up.
It's the ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure. I hate to overuse the cliche, but there's no situation that it can be more directly related to. The remediation and removal and scrapping of a derelict vessel is much less expensive than waiting for it to sink and triggering all sort of environmental cleanup efforts. So we've been sharing this message that we can take proactive action to remove these vessels from our harbor and save the taxpayer and the federal government money by taking that action. Unfortunately, as I say, to this point, we haven't been able to enter into any sort of a meaningful dialogue other than correspondence that seems to sort of pass the buck on to another department or other. The other challenge is that some of these environmental issues that can be created, if we look at the Vicky Lynn, for example, which is in our harbor now, the damage that would be done wouldn't just be cleaned up with an environmental environmental cleanup effort. There could be years or even decades of damage to a shellfish industry that's just recovering from a long industrial past in the harbors of many coastal communities, but in Ladysmith in particular. So it creates an additional sort of impact that can't be just cleaned up with more dollars. And it's just frustrating to be able to say we have an opportunity to solve the issue before it becomes a real problem, but the response is, well, as soon as it does sink, you'll have these resources available to you, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you're watching this ticking time bomb in your harbor, and that must be very frustrating.
Well, especially when you can physically see the vessel listing to one side. You look at the mast and you progressively see it going over to one side, so you know that it's taking on water slowly, but it is. And the marine survey that was done in 2012 clearly indicated, that was commissioned by the Coast Guard at the time, that the vessel, in some cases, the hull thickness was fractions of an inch. And they said that in some cases they felt that the hull was being held together by a mixture of corrosion and sea life. So to have that admission, and at that point, we did get some action from the Canadian Coast Guard to remove a portion of the contaminants on the vessel, but then their resources ran out in terms of funding to complete the task. So then here we are a year later, and we're still having the discussion about the remaining contaminants on board, the environmental impacts, and the economic impacts on a small community that's trying to recover from a long industrial history, move forward to a cleaner, more environmentally sort of responsible use of our waterfront. The derelict vessels are the biggest challenge that we have, that is right in front of us today, that seems to have some very real solutions available to us. However, we're not able to engage in the conversation that would allow us to get those solutions move forward.
And we're talking about the Vicky Lynn, but then Ladysmith isn't a very big place, but the scope of the problem there is actually huge. We were talking about an inventory of derelict vessels that was done, and it identified was 45
in Ladysmith Harbour.
in Ladysmith alone.
Yes, and
so there's a problem with that report. First of all, that report was done as a survey. So what they did was they surveyed municipalities and other significant organizations and relied on those organizations to report out what they knew. So there was no actually on-the-ground survey done. So what this report, Transport Canada report, says, they know that the report is underreporting the numbers of derelict vessels that are in British Columbia. It was only in British Columbia for this one. Right. And so they know the problem is far more serious than they themselves are reporting. And they couldn't put a cost estimate on what it would cost to clean up those derelict vessels because there was no actual physical survey done. They don't know the conditions, they don't know the contaminants that are on board all of those vessels. I mean, the Vicky Lynn is a really good example where we know exactly what's on board, and we know it's going to cost thousands of dollars to clean it up. But that's not the case for the other 240 some odd vessels that they identified that are underreported.
And that was just in BC.
That was just in BC.
Yeah, and I mean, this is an issue
across the country,
coast to coast to coast, as they say.
And inland waterways as well. Like it's not just the oceans. Inland
Great
waterways, the Great Lakes, large lakes, they all have derelict vessels on them, right? And so we know that this is a major, major problem. The other problem that we've got is aging fleets. Like the boats are getting older. There's a lot of boats there that are 30 plus years old. And we know that that's a problem waiting to happen.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, just the scope of the issue in BC is huge, and then it seems like Ladysmith is dealing with the lion's share of those vessels.
well, because there's an urgent need for us to find a solution.
Yeah.
There is a vessel in our harbor that's sitting there with 13,000 liter of oil and contaminants on board, various solvents, hydraulic fluids, all kinds of different contaminants, that is sitting there, as you said earlier, a ticking time bomb. It's taking on water, it seems to be. There's no solution that we can put forward to resolve the issue with that specific vessel. So it becomes sort of like the banner for the issue countrywide, especially in coastal communities in British Columbia and as you said, across the country. So we've got this sort of glaring example of the issue sitting in our harbor. And for us locally as the municipality of Ladysmith, we are working very hard and with all of our efforts towards sort of building a better future for our community, and our waterfront is such a key part of that. The Vicky Lynn sits next to a federal investment and other levels of government of millions of dollars in a community marina that was was done just in the last few years. And the irony is that's the home base for a purple martin recovery program, which is an endangered species. It's had a huge success. It's an award-winning program. The marina itself has received Clean Marine BC certification, 3 anchor certification as one of the most environmental marinas out there.
Yeah, just
and
recently.
just literally a stone's throw, you could throw stones and hit the Vicky Lynn 2 from their docks, is this derelict vessel that could really wash away all those investments. So again, it comes back to there's a solution available. There are funds available in the federal coffers, the Ship Source Oil Pollution Fund. There's other funds available for environmental cleanup that if they would allow us to tap those funds to resolve these issues, we could save a large amount of those funds in terms of the prevention versus a cure if we have to do a cleanup. And these other investments in community marinas that the federal and provincial governments have put forward are at risk because of a smaller amount of money that could be used to clean it up. Now, when we say a small amount of money for a small municipality of 8,000 people, when we're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for one vessel, it's not something that's affordable. You're talking about double-digit percentage increases in taxation to clean this up. And in the absence of regulations and the absence of proper process to deal with derelict vessels, it's been done before. The cleanup has happened. We've taken the costs on in the past, and new vessels come in to take their place. When you've got a strong sheltered harbor, you have a close amenities available, these derelict vessels just arrive on your doorstep, and you come out in the morning and you look down on your waterfront and there's a new one added to the collection.
And it's not just a matter of going after the owner because
Well, the thing about this is owners are already responsible. Under the current legislation, owners are responsible. The receiver of wrecks, once a vessel is identified as derelict or abandoned, the receiver of wrecks' first responsibility is to try to identify the owner.
which of course, naturally.
Of course, and the owners are still on the hook for removing the vessel. However, in many cases, the owners can't be located, or they're in an old folks' home, or they're dead, or they simply don't have the resources to take this on. So where it's possible to get the owner to take it on, fine. But in many cases, that's just not possible. And you can't, many of the municipalities won't take possession of the vessel because then they have the liability for it. And as Aaron pointed out, most municipalities don't have the money. There was one down in Esquimalt, in the Esquimalt Harbour, that cost $40,000 to remove it and clean up. Now, that didn't actually have the potential spill that the Vicky Lynn has. But you can't ask municipalities to take on that responsibility when it really does lay squarely with the federal government, or in some cases the provincial government, depending on whether it's foreshore involved.
And again, going back, Ladysmith had a barge, for example, several years ago now, basically a derelict barge in their harbor, and the instructions were take it, pull it up on the beach, have it scrapped and remove it. That was done at the cost to our taxpayers. The challenge is that as taxpayers, as citizens, we're all investing in these funds all the time. When they have funds at the federal government that are available for cleanup and things like that, but there's an opportunity to prevent the need for the cleanup at a much lower cost, it becomes very frustrating to say that there isn't some kind of a mechanism, a discussion we can have where, in all good sense, it just takes a little bit of common sense to come up with a solution that can be lasting and put the legislation in place that will allow it to be the permanent solution. So we're not asking for a one-off. A one-off would be great to deal with this issue, but as working towards a solution, engage the communities, engage the provincial government, the local governments, and have a meaningful discussion about what derelict vessels are, how it can be resolved. Put the criminal and civil liabilities in place, all the things that people talk about doing. But there needs to be something to deal with the issue right now, and right now we're not even able to have a conversation. There's a lot of letter writing, there's a lot of submissions on the behalf of community, from councils, from other members of government, and from citizens. Petitions, all kinds of stuff, but there's nary a response to those requests for assistance. And we haven't said, come and you save us. We're just saying, have a conversation with us, work towards a solution, and we'll find the solution. If we could get some assurances from the federal government that we would be assisted, we would take on the practical aspects of resolving these issues if we could have some assistance with the cost. But there's just not even willing to respond to our requests for a conversation.
Okay, I think, you're talking about that need for better cooperation between the different levels of government. I think we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of the potential solutions for dealing with derelict vessels. Welcome back to Head On here on Shaw TV, talking about derelict vessels today. I'm joined by MP Jean Crowder for Nanaimo Cowichan. Thanks for being here. And Aaron Stone, Mayor of Ladysmith. I've got a couple of photos here to illustrate the issue of derelict vessels a little bit for our viewers. So that's one in the Nanaimo Harbour that has since been removed. And second photo of an issue, that derelict vessel's in Ladysmith Harbour.
Yeah, it's a burned out shell of remnants of one of the derelict vessels that was beached in our harbor. It's still there. Still there.
Okay. So we've talked about some of the risks posed by derelict vessels, and let's talk about some of the potential solutions. There's been like literal years of work that has gone into this issue. You know, Ladysmith, I have motions dating back to 2007. Jean, your first private member's bill was 2011, but you'd been trying to address the issue way before that.
Way before that. I mean, numerous, you know, this has been a problem up and down throughout my riding anyway, and other places. And so we started with writing letters to try to raise awareness. I introduced a private member's bill in 2011. It finally came up for a vote in the House just late in the spring and was defeated. But what has happened over the last 4 years, interestingly enough, is that with the introduction of the bill and with many community organizations and municipalities joining the fray, First Nations communities, it has really ramped up the attention across the country. And so in 2013, the Minister of Transport actually did strike a working group to start taking a look at it. Now, they promised a report in the fall of 2013, which never materialized. But the private member's bill has certainly brought attention to it from coast to coast to coast. And so getting attention to the matter is a really good first step, but there are a number of things that have to happen in order for this to be dealt with. Transport Canada did a report, and in that report they did make some recommendations. First of all, they recommended that all levels of government get together and work on the problem, and that would be a really good first step. I know Aaron
seems like a natural step, but it's harder than it seems to get everyone in one room or even on one email thread to engage on the issue.
Well, part of the problem is as I think Eric can speak to, the fact is you write a letter to the ministers at the federal government level and you don't get a response.
Yeah, we've sent 2 letters asking for cooperation. It's not confrontational, it's just that we have a challenge and that we just want to engage them in a conversation around derelict vessels. We've proposed solutions in those letters. We've sent a joint letter from Staminas Chief John Elliott and myself, again speaking to the impacts on both of our communities. We share Ladysmith Harbour. We've had regional directors from the regional district write letters and come out and support different efforts that we've had to raise the awareness of the issue, and we've just been unable to have somebody sort of pick up the phone and give us any kind of response or even just address the issue. You know, when the Canadian Coast Guard has a survey commission on a vessel that basically says, you know, the summary was it's an imminent threat to sink nearly 2 years ago now, and be unable to get any kind of action on it, it just seems nonsensical. Like I said, there's a very common sense solutions that are available to us if we're willing to have the conversation and say we're orienting ourselves around a solution to derelict vessels, get the feedback from the local communities, get the feedback from the province. Federal government can put a process in place that can allow us to solve this. It's not as complicated as it would seem to be from the lack of action that we've had. There's very common sense solutions out there that we can undertake if we're willing to have a conversation between all of our level of government partners. And I like to say partners because we are partners. This is a wellness issue and a financial issue for every resident and every level of government. So, you know, there's a great opportunity for other levels of government to step up and say we're willing to look for a solution and to help us implement those solutions.
So the Transport Canada study also pointed out to a couple of other things that have to happen. One is that we do need an adequate assessment of how many derelict vessels are out there, because we have no idea what the cost is or what the resources are required in order to clean them up. And so what they suggested is that you need a coordinated centralized database to record where the vessels are and what kind of condition there is. The third thing that the report recommended is there does need to be some dedicated resources available in order to help municipalities and provincial governments deal with this. Now, I want to talk about a solution that's worked. In Washington State, about 10, 12 years ago, they did put together a plan to deal with derelict vessels. In the last 10 years, they have taken 500 derelict vessels off the water in the Washington State area. And what they've done is that there's a licensing fee for derelict vessels, and that fee goes into a fund that helps remove the vessels or remediate the vessels. It also works closely with local governments because right now local government can't take charge because they end up owning the liability. But this fund, working with the state government, allows local governments to take charge and actually get the resources to do it.
You said a licensing fee for derelict or just
for
vessels in general,
Yeah,
right?
for vessels in general.
Yeah.
It's not a large amount either.
No, it's not. And it's like we pay a recycling fee on our vehicles when we buy them, on our batteries, on our car tires.
Computers, everything.
Everything. We pay recycling fees on these
Right,
things.
to deal with the end of life
End of life.
scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is what we're dealing with derelict vessels. It's
But
an
that doesn't
end-of-life
exist for
scenario.
boats.
It does not exist for boats in Canada, but it does in Washington State.
Okay, and so to your mind, that system is working well for them, especially in light of them having removed 500. That would deal with our problem in BC.
Yeah, and in what Washington State has now come up against is that they actually need to put additional funds. They did seed the fund when they started it out, so
Right.
it wasn't starting from scratch. But the scope of the problem is so big that they've realized that they do have to put some additional state money in it. But it has gone a long way towards dealing with the problems. And this still doesn't take the owners off the hook. Owners are still responsible, but as we talked about earlier, you can't always identify the owners or they don't have the money. And so you do need some way to deal with these vessels. Otherwise, they're going to be like the Vicky Lynn, and it's going to cost us way more money to deal with it if we let that boat go down.
Yeah, when you hear the derelict vessels conversation come up among local governments, the Washington model is the words that come out of people's mouth. Well, if we could do
Right.
if we could have the Washington model, because they've done the hard work there to give us some framework. We can use that as a basis for our own model of vessel cleanup and remediation and scrapping and removal of these derelict vessels. You know, it's very clear to talk about the environmental issues that go along with it, but when you take the economic impacts to coastal communities, many coastal communities, especially smaller municipalities, rely on their waterfronts and their harbors to be the vibrant engine to the future economic opportunities
Yeah,
that
it's
they
a
have.
tourist attraction. It's
Tourist attraction. It's a way of life. It's a lifestyle. It attracts young families,
Yeah.
recreation, health, fitness, all of those things. Aquaculture, right? You look at a growing aquaculture industry in our harbor, and the impacts that a vessel like the Vicky Lynn 2, and there are very many more like her, that the impacts that they would have go far beyond any rational argument against dealing with this issue. So it becomes really hard when we talk about solutions. There's many examples out there of solutions that can work. There's very common sense approaches that can work, and just to have that conversation and be willing to sort of sit down, take different levels of responsibility. The municipalities are not saying that they don't want to take on any responsibility, coordinate action, whatever is needed to be a partner in the process. What we need is willing partners on the other side to engage in the conversation and say, listen, we're going to orient ourselves around a solution. We're going to get your feedback. We're going to come back to you with a solution for your sort of input and approval, and then we'll take action.
Yeah, like the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities and Union of BC Municipalities has been really proactive about this. Like, it seems like time and time again trying to put forward solutions, and they just go nowhere.
The Islands Trust as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got all of these municipal organizations that have been on this and have been clearly indicating a willingness to work with the provincial and federal governments on this problem. And I mean, to my understanding, they really haven't got anywhere with regards to getting any movement on coming up with solutions.
And then, so you had the private members bill that was about making the Coast Guard the receiver of wrecks. That unfortunately didn't get enough support from Conservative MPs.
Only one Conservative MP voted for
Right.
it.
And that was John Weston of West Vancouver Sunshine Coast. And then he proposed his own bill around derelict vessels, but sort of a half-hearted crack at it.
Well, all his bill will do is criminalize the owners. And as we pointed out earlier, oftentimes you can't identify the owners, and the owners are already responsible for it. And I was very clear in my private members bill. I always said in my private members bill, this is not the solution, because in a private members bill, you can't compel the government to spend money. But my private members bill was an effort to at least focus, so people would know that they had a one-stop shop to call when there was a derelict vessel. Right now, the government's own Transport Canada website says, if this happens, call Transport Canada. If this happens, call Coast Guard. If this happens, you might want to call the provincial government. That's the government's Transport Canada website, right? So they already acknowledge that they're bouncing people all over the place. And my bill was an effort to focus where people should call, but also to compel the minister to make regulations with regards to derelict vessels.
And now we're facing an election, and everything is sort of up in the air. And you know, the future of this issue, you know, it's not a party issue. It's you know, no matter who's in power, we need to work together and find a solution.
The derelict vessel bill, the private members bill that Jean put forward, was an excellent opportunity for our government to say, that's not good enough, or whatever it was, and take action. And John Weston's bill was the only response that we've seen from the Conservative government that was willing to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't address the issue that as it sits today. Putting civil and criminal liabilities already exist, but criminal liabilities on the owners doesn't do anything to resolve the 200 plus vessels that is probably a gross underestimation that are currently in our waters. So it's all great to say, oh, well, this is what we're going to do, but when the government doesn't take the opportunity, the conversation's been started. You've got a lot of voters, a lot of citizens engaged in the issue. You have a lot of local governments. You've got regional districts involved in the situation. They could have had that opportunity to engage in a meaningful solution that would result in solving the problem. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to.
John Weston's bill wouldn't have dealt with the owner on the Vicky Lynn.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just,
And I mean,
a really good example, right?
in the meantime, while we wait for some solutions to come forward and we wait to see what the election results are, I guess we just have to kind of cross our fingers that the Vicky Lynn doesn't go anywhere.
Well,
Okay.
and I think in the election that what people need to do is make sure that they ask the candidates what they would be, what their party, if they were government, would be prepared to do about derelict vessels. It's a good all candidates question.
for sure.
Excellent. I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me today.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of the volunteers who get this show on the air every week here on Shaw TV. And of course, thank you for watching.